Supply chains are complex, and securing your software supply chain is no exception. From the huge number of components and dependencies that you use from a wide variety of sources, to your developers adding their own code, to your applications being delivered to users around the world. How do you keep track of all this? At Anchore, we believe that managing and protecting your software supply chain starts with establishing trust. And that trust begins with understanding and managing your software bill of materials, or SBOM. SBOMs function as an ingredients label for software. And when you track and manage the ingredients, you can trust the components you use or bring into your development pipeline. It starts with verifying the provenance of open source code and validating supplier SBOMs, and keeping a repository of SBOMs to track the ingredients of your software over time. And maintaining trust as you build, with continuous automated security that uncovers vulnerabilities, malware, and leaked secrets, with compliance checks to root out any critical issues. Then, when you're ready to deliver your software, providing SBOMs and continuing to monitor for security risks after deployment, so your users can trust you and rest assured that the software you deliver was built securely every step of the way. To learn more about Anchore's software supply chain management solution, visit us at anchore.com.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We got, once Nic jumps on, we'll get this kicked off, and I got to share my screen. Let's see. All right. Awesome. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Terence. Thank you, Nic, for agreeing to do this webinar today. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. So our topic is easy compliance is continuous compliance. So we're going to do some intros as to who's here and the companies and all that. But before we start, I just want to say for everyone attending, we love questions, right? This is meant to be a very conversational webinar, a very fireside chat, so to speak. So if you have questions, just chuck them in the chat box and we'll get to them right away. That's kind of our intent here. We've got some handouts you'll get. There's all the usual webinar, to do at the end and all that. So we'll just kind of kick it right off and get a move on here as soon as I find my window to move us on. There we go. All right. So it's me, Terence, and Nic, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Terence, we'll start with you. Tell us who you are, kind of why are you here, and what's up?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for having me. So I'm the CEO of Dreamfactory Software. We're a client of Anchore, and it is actually at Sage as well, which is sort of what we're here to talk about. Dreamfactory, we'll get to talk about in a little bit, so I won't spoil that.
Awesome. Nic.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Nic Chaillan. I'm the former Air Force and Space Force Chief Software Officer. I'm also the founder of Sage. Sage brings generative AI to the government and regulated industries, and we're also a consumer of Anchore as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Nic. And finally, me. I'm Josh. I'm the Vice President of Security here at Anchore. I do a bunch of wacky stuff kind of out in the universe. I work with the OpenSSF. I've got a security podcast I do. I'm just kind of that bad penny of open source, we'll say, that no one can get rid of. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited for today. So let's kick off just kind of explaining the companies and what they do, because we're kind of Dreamfactory is the thing that's binding Nic and I together for this particular webinar. But Nic, we'll start off with you with Ask Sage, because when I learned what Ask Sage does, like my head exploded. I've been doing compliance for a long time. And anyone who's done evidence collection and writing up the packets and all of that knows the pain and suffering that involves. And you've truly created an easy button for it.
Yeah, we started first with making generative AI easy, which is not a small feat. Supporting 150 models and be agnostic, being able to run on the classified clouds, on the commercial cloud. So we have a lot of different offering, starting $15 a month, so super easy to get started. And then we built products right on top of Gen AI to automate velocity of people. So coding, cyber, acquisition, you name it. And one that's exciting that you're mentioning here is our suite called In a Box. And we have ATO in a box, FedRAMP in a box, CMMC in a box, and acquisition in a box. And with specifically ATO in a box and FedRAMP in a box, you can generate your documentation package to go through your authorization to be authorized in a government setting. So it could be FedRAMP, could be an ATO for DoD or for one of the civilian agencies. So very exciting. I went from 300 grand quote that a 3 PAO wanted me to pay and wait 6 months to get my package down to 2 weeks for pretty much $4,000. So saved a fortune and a bunch of time. And now we were able to get our FedRAMP High ATO and our DoD L5 ATO as well.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I can't get my smile. I'm sorry. I've been doing this for a long time, and this freaks me out by how awesome it is. Okay. Terence, tell us about Dreamfactory.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So Dreamfactory is an open source, or actually open core on-prem API generation platform. We're trying to kind of create a new category around API generation because it is really new. A new capability doesn't quite exist in many places in the market. And what we're able to do is we're able to build, secure, and document RESTful APIs. And so we're actually mapping a database schema and turning it into RESTful endpoints. So we're putting a RESTful endpoint in front of any table, view, or stored procedure, and then wrapping it in enterprise security. So interestingly enough, we actually had a bunch of public sector customers find us just sort of organically via Google search, and specifically NIH. We didn't need an ATO, but having been former military, I worked sort of on the high side IT within the Navy as an intelligence officer. I knew that there's like a proper way that government buys software. It's not typically the way. And so started looking at through that process, knew an ATO was going to be down the road, even though we are we're pretty simple open source tool. There's still obviously a ton of compliance required. And so connected with Ask Sage, and Nicholas at the time was working through a bunch of he was demoing essentially ATO in a box on his own software. And so that caught my attention. So we started working with him, and Anchor is part of that process, which we'll get into.
Indeed. And I'll just kind of round it off with what Anchor does. So we have a next generation supply chain analysis tool called Anchor Enterprise that we're going to kind of poke at it later on, because we've got some examples to show off what some of the clever things Dreamfactory and Ask Sage have done here. But fundamentally, when you need your continuous scanning for whatever compliance you're trying to get, or even just good cyber hygiene, this is one of the tools that you can kind of point at container registries, and it does its magic thing all by itself. And then you can set up policies and kind of do all that. It's a really cool tool. It's a lot of fun to use. So we'll just jump right in, I think. And so we're here to talk about fundamentally what Dreamfactory has done. So I know, Terence, you touched briefly on the RESTful magic that you've created. So let's kind of dive a little deeper into that and talk about like what exactly is the Dreamfactory product, because I know there's a couple interesting things I've noticed about this. And I think one of the important ones is it's on-prem, right? This is not a cloud service, which obviously when you're dealing with a lot of federal agencies, that's one of the requirements they definitely want. But then also there's like securing APIs is, we all love to talk about it, but it's not an easy thing to do.
No, and the industry sort of analysis shows that something like 70% of APIs are internal, right? They're private APIs. And so as we look to build security in depth across our organization, right, knowing that that breaches unfortunately are sort of increasingly unavoidable, building out robust industry best standard security into APIs is absolutely critical, right? And there's a lot of breaches that would have been severely minimized if simple things like rate limiting and auth had been implemented on private internal APIs. So yeah, when it comes to Dreamfactory and use cases, we're not talking about public or open APIs. We're talking about specific. It's actually impossible to build an open API in Dreamfactory. You have to implement authentication. And so what we're really helping organizations do is build out those internal APIs, whether that's to connect legacy systems that are otherwise very hard to write API integrations to, or whether it's something like Snowflake, where there's a bunch of kind of ways to build API integrations, but people need to do them at scale in a way that's going to allow them to kind of bring their own authentication. We're seeing a lot of adoption there, specifically on the data warehousing sort of specifically Snowflake side of things. So and so security is obviously absolutely critical there, right? And being able to bring an SBOM to the conversation at the very beginning and say, hey, check out our repo, check out our scans, right? Like we're an open book, completely changes the conversation. It makes it a lot easier to try for a CISO to say, you know what, let's give this a go. Let's set up a pilot or whatever.
For sure. And I'm gonna pick on Nic for a moment here, because I think like the work you did at Platform One in the public sector, I feel like that normalized the SBOM conversation quite a lot in the federal space for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's so essential, right? People still don't understand the dependencies they are dealing with, and so having the ability to have a single pane of glass and see already what you're inheriting from other products. People always forget, when they start ingesting and adding all these open source bits, that they are now responsible for delivering this to the government or to somebody else, and so creates a lot of headaches. And having the ability to know exactly not just the versions, but also the licenses that you're inheriting in terms of terms and conditions and things, that's essential.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, criminy, we could talk about just open source licenses for a couple of hours. We're not going to, but we could. All right. So, let's talk about compliance, right? This one, I think, is it's part of the reason we're here. It's obviously, what kind of brings Nic into the picture, because anytime you need, this sort of federal evidence, it's an interesting and challenging problem, I think. So I'll start off with you, Terence. Like, just kind of explain the thinking, all of the work that you've done. And I think additionally, most importantly, is I love how easy Ask Sage has made a whole bunch of this, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we built a company using NIST best standards, and the fact that we're open source makes a lot of these conversations much easier when it comes to compliance. But being able to bring sort of a baseline of evidence to the table of like what we've already built, how we've documented it, how we've sort of set up processes around security and compliance, and being able to sort of throw that all into Ask Sage allowed us to scale that to the size of an ATO package. So it's like the hard work to get your company and your product to a place where it's compliant is still very much there, but Ask Sage has made it much easier to check all the boxes, quite literally, figuratively speaking, when it comes to the compliance side.
All right, so let me ask Terence. We've got, I know, just kind of a spattering of standards on the screen. Like, how do you decide? What do you, if you're an organization saying, I want to interact with some federal agency or regulated industry or whatever, like there's literally thousands of compliance standards out there. Like, how do you decide?
Well, I spent 2 years on Google's Red Team before joining Dreamfactory. So nice. I'm bringing, and obviously I spoke about my time as an intelligence officer. So I'm going to bring it to a certain degree, a depth of knowledge into like what I really believe is necessary based on a bunch of circumstantials and just sort of my experience in industry. But then really the customer decides, right? So everyone knows there's tons of overlap between a bunch of these standards. There's a bunch of really strong best practices that apply to different companies and different software based on a bunch of circumstances. Like everyone needs to do that, right? You need to sort of understand the landscape and the threats. And then like what sort of checklist do you actually download and start filling out and kind of building out is really for us largely led by what our customers are asking for. And that's obviously the whole process of building an ATO, right?
For sure. Okay, let's talk about what that means. So Nic, I'm gonna put you on the spot here for this one. So we keep talking about an ATO packet. what does it mean to go from saying, I want to comply with a certain standard to making sure the organization you're trying to work with, the agency or whoever, like you can't just say, oh yeah, I'm compliant, right? That's not how this works. So how do we go from making that decision to actually, and what is ATO for anyone who doesn't know?
I mean, you can say if you want. It doesn't mean they're gonna care about what you said. So if you want to demonstrate it and prove it, it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at what an ATO package is supposed to be, you're supposed to have all the evidence to demonstrate that you're secure and compliant. In the government use case, mostly with the NIST 800-53 controls, 1200 controls, kind of a nightmare. If I'm a company, by the way, if you use NIST as a cyber framework, you're in a good shape because it's going to map pretty much with everything else. So you're in a great capacity to then adjust as needed. So when you look at an ATO package, it's a lot of paperweight. Let's be clear. You could potentially be compliant on paper and not secure. Of course, when you take a step back and you look at what it takes to have your product be actually secure and compliant, well, Ask Sage was built, 90% of the code base was built by Ask Sage. So you could use generative AI to accelerate that desire of security and compliance and have it baked into your process. The issue is a lot of companies rush fast to build prototypes and go to market, which is okay, but they often forget about cyber, and so you have this bolted on cyber layer after the fact. It just doesn't work very well. So I would rather be 10% slower along the way, but have cyber baked in and then be able to scale and grow it and be compliant and secure. So that's my number one advice is don't forget about it. Don't just move fast for the sake of moving fast. When it comes to the package itself, every agency is going to be a little bit different, but of course, when you do a FedRAMP package, it's very well set up in terms of the different appendices and information you need to provide. It's pretty vast, right? Between all the different policies and procedures that you have to produce, change management, kind of your software life cycle, your disaster recovery, your incident response. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. But it's also, looking at each control and demonstrating if you're inheriting some of it thanks to, a cloud provider, or if you're partially implementing solutions, or if you need to have the customer be responsible for that control. So you have to explain that, and it takes a long time. 1,200 controls. It's a lot of work, and then on top of that, you have to provide all that evidence and be able to demonstrate it with facts and scans and monthly continuous monitoring reports, and that's where automation can be a game changer.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you mentioned NIST 853, which is 1,200 controls, which is terrifying to anyone who's looking to get started anywhere else. But why don't we talk about, there's CMMC, for example, which is a much, much lower bar in that regard.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess the question I have for you is, let's say I'm looking to do something not 853, let's say CMMC, 800, what's that? 218, 7 something. I can't remember what it is.
110 controls, yeah.
Right, 110. So it's approachable. So if I'm using a tool like Ask Sage, what does that look like? How am I interacting? What is the back and forth? What's happening?
It's approachable for sure, but what's interesting is the 110 controls cover most of the important stuff that 800-53 is going to cover as well. But 800-53 is much more precise in details versus the 171 controls from CMMC are much broader and vague, which could be good and bad, by the way, because then it's a debate as far as how to do it right, and you're going to have people disagree and whatnot. So it's not always great, right, to have vagueness in controls. And so, you're still going to cover the most important stuff. Let's face it, right? If you're building a software product and you want to comply with CMMC, it's not going to be that different from, having to comply. There'll be a few extra things you got to do. But the fact is, you're going to have to do all the big stuff, right? The backups, the access control, the least privilege, the networking, all that control, tight control of zero trust and all that kind of stuff. And if you embrace modern ways of building software, DevSecOps, software bill of materials, a CI/CD pipeline, you have your baked-in security, zero trust, labeling of data, access control, least privilege, all these kind of common sense best practices. If you start a new product today, you're going to inherit a lot of that from the get-go, and the lift is going to be way less significant. So when I built Ask Sage, from the get-go, we designed it to be, compliant. And really, I would argue that it's not a much bigger lift to do that day one if you do it right and you know what you're supposed to do, or you ask Sage to tell you what you're supposed to do. But either way, it's not going to be much, maybe a 10% tax, as I call it, a security tax on your velocity, which is not bad at all.
I mean, man, I've been in orgs that tried to retool to meet a standard, and it's brutal.
That's a 2-year nightmare. And it's often, easier to rewrite from scratch.
Exactly. I have a suspicion it might be easier to start it the right way. But all right.
The fact is, you look at the lifespan of software nowadays and kind of these complex code base and moving to microservices and smaller, footprint and microservice architecture, it's easier, right, to then rewrite something and kind of make it more flexible and capable of running air gap. What you find also is, you mentioned, SaaS. I mean, you can be a SaaS offering in the government. It's just a massive lift with FedRAMP like we did. We support both, air gapped and on-premise and SaaS offerings. But, if you take a step back when it comes to building capabilities, a lot of teams use existing SaaS offerings, and many of these APIs or services that you're using may not be compliant. And so now you're inheriting maybe a great feature, but now you have this impossible task to get this accredited. And so looking at your dependency and understanding who brings what to the table and what their status is when it comes to their own compliance is going to limit your ability to go sell to the government if you're using an API that's not FedRAMP High or DoDL5.
Yep, that's right. Exactly. All right, let's kind of shift ourselves back to talking to Terence a little bit here. So Dreamfactory is an on-prem product, right? So let's make sure we all understand what that means. What are we talking about by on-prem in this context?
On-prem means the customer is installing it locally within their environment. That can mean a private cloud. The term on-prem sort of come to mean different things. It's been a long time since the days of LAN parties where you bring your own tower. For the most part, we're talking about running like a private cloud, and many customers use on-prem to describe that. But what it's not is a hosted offering, right? Hosted on someone else's server, someone else's bill.
That's right.
And so we do have customers literally running Dreamfactory like on a server rack in the basement, next to like old mainframes. But for the most part, it's on the cloud. And that means it's a relatively straightforward software package because everything's sort of self-contained right there. Okay. And for those wondering, Dreamfactory is just a Laravel, essentially web app, right, and a system database. It's quite lightweight. We've had customers installed on a Raspberry Pi.
Nice.
Context, yeah. So in the case of Dreamfactory, I think this is a bit of an easier lift because we've got a pretty tight offering,
Okay. You say it's a tight offering, and I know one of the things we discussed while we were getting ready for this webinar is that you have done some things to your product to, we'll say, artificially constrain it because of security requirements, because you are dealing with very sensitive data. So kind of let's talk about some of that and what does that mean for your eventual, compliance gathering and evidence gathering, and then obviously handing that evidence off.
So Dreamfactory was architected from the beginning to be standalone, to not require sort of the ability to phone home. We don't even have it built into the product. Most of our customers, specifically some very big oil and gas companies, are actually running Dreamfactory more or less air gapped. behind multiple
Nice.
firewalls, right? Not able to access the internet, and it's an interesting business to run because renewals are a little bit awkward sometimes because people don't even realize sometimes, like, oh, that it's been 3 years and that thing's still running back there, chugging away. Like, no, this is, trust me, I think this is a pretty important part of your infrastructure. So what we've done though with Anchor is we've set up as part of our CIDC pipeline vuln management scanning, right? So even though we can't touch the product when it's installed in a customer's network, we're running those scans daily to for ourselves to know exactly what's happened, what's changed across the threat landscape, so we can inform customers along the way and make sure they're prepared. But as the slide points out, right, these internal integrations are processing incredibly sensitive data, and so being able to not only show that, hey, this is effectively an air gap product that will run and isn't pushing data, run by itself without pushing data outside of your network. We can also say, hey, and we know that it doesn't have some massive vulnerability that if an attacker does make access to your network, they're not gonna be able to just pop a hole in the side of it and use that to get access to otherwise sensitive APIs. So it's been a really working with Anchor has been a really fantastic addition to that larger security stance posture.
Awesome. Okay, let's jump to vulnerabilities, because I think this is one of those interesting problems we've all been suffering from for the last how long? Like it's been a while. And so let's talk about the things I know already of Dreamfactory, and I know Nic is very opinionated on this as well, of just fundamentally attack surface reduction, right? Because everything has vulnerabilities, but what can we do here? So Nic, I'll pick on you to kind of start, because I know you're a huge proponent of like the chain guard, those minimal images they have. I know Dreamfactory is using those,
yeah.
and there's a lot to say about to what you talked about before, is just doing it right from the start.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the container-based images you can use for Python or Go or pick your poison databases, whatever, right? You're going to inherit a lot of CVEs from all these different open source projects or even companies. And when I started, we started with a UBI, Universal Base Image from Red Hat, which is a RHEL 8 based image at the time. And you get about 700 CVs, which is insane, right? And we swapped to ChainGuard to get it down to 0. That's just mind-boggling. I mean, you can't even fathom the time saving. With FedRAMP and DoDR5, you have to have a poem for each CVEs, and you have to fix them. And having to do that for 700 CVEs would be just completely insane. That's without your own software, right? That's just what you just inherited from the infrastructure and all your dependencies. And so for us, using the ChainGuard images changed so our entire velocity to handle the CVEs, we maybe fix about 100 CVEs upstream along the way, helping ChainGuard to fix some as well. But that was nothing compared to the probably 1,000 plus we would have to fix with us something else. And ChainGuard is using this kind of concept of a distro-less, lightweight image where you only add what you need, and so you start very small, and you just add the packages you need, and so that gives you a very tight control of what's in there.
For sure. All right, Terence, I want to pick on you now. So obviously you're using a minimal base image, but you still have software you put on top of that, right?
Absolutely.
So what do we do with that?
We built with Laravel, which has a fantastic community and is very security conscious, and leaning into that community and using the existing packages where Laravel is able to support capabilities that we have. We don't frankly see a ton of vulnerabilities coming up. When they do, we're quickly made aware of them, and we address them. But it hasn't actually been that heavy of a lift, and a lot of it is, as Nic was saying, because we're building with a a distroless lightweight container. Now there's a lot of work up front to adding the packages you need, specifically around connectors, right? SQL Server is not open source, right? And so like sometimes that's a lot of work, but what it gives you down the road is a much more airtight solution, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And so, I mean, let's talk about what happens when we find a vulnerability, though, because kind of I wrote down on this slide, fix, remediate, or ignore. Because the reality is, I mean, in a perfect world, we would fix everything very quickly, obviously, but we can't always do that. And I'm curious, has this come up before, where you have to remediate or even ignore something as you're going along the way?
Absolutely. There's a bunch of vulnerabilities in the standard sort of base image that have been there for years, and we're not going to be able to remediate. And clearly the package owner is going to as well, right? Where we really look to fix and remediate is where we have control and where we obviously see a threat vector. And a lot of it comes down to really understanding the product and understanding how customers are using it, and understanding really from a robust point of view, the customer's ecosystem and the customer's threat tolerance and everything else, right? And those are important conversations to have with your customers, and you have to be open and be proactive in those discussions, so everyone can kind of understand the risks and understand the context and the nuance, and we can all agree to a decision moving forward.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Awesome. All right, I've got a little demo that I cooked up to help kind of explain the minimal attack surface that we've been talking about and why it matters. So I have an instance of Anchor Enterprise running in my basement that I've got fired up here. I added some images to it. I'm very sad that I added the chain guard Python, but I didn't add like the official Python because the difference is stark, but that's okay. I've got some good examples. So Terence and Nic, as I go through this, just feel free to jump in with any commentary or ideas or questions, or if you think I'm doing something wrong, that's fine too. I'm not a demo expert by any means, but I'm going to start with Debian. Well, no, I'm sorry. Before I do that, I'm going to start with what we're looking at right here. This is Anchor Enterprise. This is version you can see up in the corner here, 5.7, which is the latest version we have available right now. I think 5.8 comes out very soon, maybe tomorrow. I don't know for sure. Don't quote me on that. But basically what I've done here is I've added some container registries and containers to Anchor Enterprise. And so like here we've got docker.io is most of them, but then the chain guard registries over here. And then this is the repository. Like in this case, library Debian is like the Debian official Docker image. And then I added the latest tag, and I only added the latest tag because I wanted to keep this a reasonable size. You could add like every Debian tag ever, and then you'd have like a million things that are listed in Anchor, and it'll scan them all and store the SBOMs and all that jazz. But for our purposes, we're interested in looking at these specific images. And like in this case, latest is a tag that gets updated, to whatever the latest thing is from Debian. And so we have two container images. I can click here. We'll see both images. And there is something to be said about keeping old versions of your content. And this is where, like Terence was mentioning, understanding what someone is running in their environment. If you have an SBOM for every version you've ever released, it becomes trivial to go back in time and look at it and say, what was in that? Like, what is going on? And you can even scan it for vulnerabilities and be like, what happens if I scan a 3-year-old application? What does it look like? It looks terrible is what it looks like, but you get the idea. This
is critical for us because we often find customers who are running 2 or 3-year-old software.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's behind 2 firewalls and it never got scanned. And, they must have seen our newsletters about, releases, but just ignored them. So
exactly.
No, this is critical.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, so Anchor Enterprise also runs on-prem. So we're completely familiar with this problem where it's amazing. Well, I mean, there was just the whole CrowdStrike snafu. And then because Southwest Airlines was running Windows 95, they escaped it. So you never know what's out there. Right. But okay. So I want to show specifically the Debian container image because Nic mentioned Red Hat images with hundreds of vulnerabilities in it. And this is kind of one of those examples where if we look at a container image, like a general purpose container image, this is Debian in this case, it's got 67 findings. But if you scan a rel image or kind of any of the Ubuntu, whatever, pick a distro, the big distros, you're going to get results like this because it takes kind of a more kitchen sink like approach where there's lots of stuff in here and we don't necessarily need all of it. I mean, one of my favorites is there you're going to find things like VI in these images, right? Like we don't need VI in a container that we're freaking running a service on. That's wild, but whatever. It is what it is. And so part of the hardening process is you can either take an image like this and try to clean it up, which is very, very hard to do. Anyone who's ever tried to remove things from a container, you know the pain because you take a file out and then everything explodes. And then you're like, well, got to leave that one in. And it becomes just this ridiculous game of, let's see what works. And it's not a good use of time. Now, there are, however, let's go back to the images here. There are things like Alpine, right? Alpine Linux is a very small distribution. It's very minimal. And there's one other thing. Let's do just before we go on. Let's look at the Debian image and let's look at how many packages are in it because that's one of the questions we'll look at. So we can go over to our SBOM tab here and there are 9 pages, 10 each. So you figure that's a lot of stuff. 88 things, right? So basically 88 packages in this distribution, which is a lot, right? Now, let's look at Alpine. And we're going to see it's going to be a very different story. Where if we look at, we'll just start with the SBOM first, and we're going to see 14. 14. And you can get even smaller than this, right? So anyway, but now when we look at the vulnerabilities, like I don't even know what this looks like. Yeah, Alpine has none, right? So this is an example of kind of like what we were talking about with what ChainGuard is trying to do. By using a small number of things, you can control what your vulnerability list looks like. You can control that attack surface, right? That's fundamentally what we're doing here. And then I've got one of my favorites here. I'm going to pick on an open, well, it's the OpenJDK distribution from Eclipse, the Eclipse Foundation. And this one always just is wild. 54. They cleaned it up. Good for them. I know I've scanned this before and it's had hundreds and hundreds of findings. And this is just one of those examples where when you have a lot of stuff, it becomes a challenge. I mean, let's look at the SBOM. We've got the OS has, it's loading. 130. I should make this smaller so I can read. But then this also comes with Java packages, for example, right? Only one Java package because they're installing it as operating system packages. That's right. Never mind. Okay. Now I have 2 other things to show. So there's the ChainGuard image, which is Python. We talked about that. And this, again, we're going to look at the vulnerabilities and it's nothing, nice and clean. And this is something ChainGuard does where they focus on keeping things up to date. And that way you can keep that attack surface minimal, which I think is great. I like that a lot. I think it's small attack surface. No one is going to argue about that, right? I think that's a good idea. Now, there's one last thing I want to show, and that's SIFT. SIFT is the open source SBOM scanner Anchor creates. And this is like the ultimate distroless container. This container contains SIFT, and that's it. So if we look at the SBOM, for example, we have to actually look at the files. This is it. It has 6 files in the container, like not 6 packages, 6 files. Because the way Go works is you can compile SIFT as a binary. And then there's a couple of other things we need to add in here, right? Like directories and certificates and whatnot. But this is another one of those examples. When you only have a binary, you're not carrying that baggage around. So this is one of my favorite things to show off. However, because it's Go, and Go will statically compile a whole bunch of the Go standard library into it, sometimes this lights up like a Christmas tree because Go will put out a release. There will be tons of vulnerabilities in the previous version of Go, which now will show up all individually until you update SIFT to the next version. So even though you're using a small attack surface, obviously you still have those instances where vulnerabilities come out. You have to do something about the vulnerabilities just because that's the nature of the beast. All right, I feel like I talked for a long time. Terence and Nick, do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
No, I think you did a great job showing kind of the importance of at least being aware of what you're picking, right? And that's the issue also when you see development teams looking at different options and not scanning things before they pick a new dependency or a new module, new Python package or whatever it may be. by having access to this, you can now know before you start investing time and money into something that you should maybe not use it.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Let me see about fixing my screen now. I'm very bad at slides. No, this one. All right. We got kind of the final thoughts and wrap up. I've got a question in the chat I'll ask, but I'm going to start this time because I've waited till the end and all the other slides. So I think all in all, this is a fun conversation. I think the things I see Ask Sage and Dreamfactory doing feel very cutting edge and modern, which is great because, I mean, anytime you talk about security, there's always like the burden of legacy behind us sometimes. And it's exciting when we get to see how, we're using new tools to do new things in cool ways. And I like that a lot. I mean, I'm excited you guys are Anchor customers and partners because that's super exciting. It's, again, fun seeing, cool companies doing cool things that you get to work with. It's always a good time. And I feel like everything we talked about today, all of this stuff, it's easy, especially right now, to feel like security is just this horrible weight crushing us all. Because it's been a weekend, right? Anyone who's dealing with anything, but like there's a lot of cool stuff going on and there's a lot of fun work. And I think like these are examples of making things better and not just doing security for the sake of security. So, all right. Which one, Nic or Terence? Who wants to go next?
Go for it.
All right.
This weekend's been, it's been really kind of chaotic, and I've had a lot of friends and colleagues reach out, and I think it just speaks to how, as organizations kind of layer on decades and decades of technology, that debt just becomes kind of overwhelming, right? And it becomes a sort of crushing weight underneath them. And DoD is definitely is in that wheelhouse in many ways, right? So I'm excited to be part of this sort of, I think of like a new generation of tech companies looking really to build with DoD in mind and help them kind of move forward into the next generation technology, right? And push off some of this legacy debt.
For sure. All right, Nic.
I think the big piece to remember here is being proactive, right? And not pretending it's not happening, and proactively looking at cybersecurity as a way to differentiate yourself, but also to accelerate your outcomes. At first, for technical people, it's boring and annoying, and people don't want to pay attention to it. But at the end of the day, you have no choice. It's going to hurt your business. It's going to hurt your product. And so being able to proactively see what's going on and pay attention and have this mentality of baked-in security and ruthless automation, where everything has to be automated. You're not leaving room for manual steps in your software release process. With Ask Sage, we kill containers every 4 hours, and then we build images, every day, and go back to immutable state every 4 hours. So if a malicious actor got a foothold in Ask Sage, every 4 hours, they will lose everything they've done. So there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate, risk outside of what we already talked about. And so it's a great enabler for your velocity, but also for your peace of mind.
For sure. All right. That ties nicely into the question we have in the chat that came in. It asks about our view of Nessus and Splunk, which I think, kind of to tie into your whole, other risk conversation, Nic. So I'm highly opinionated on these tools. I worked at Elastic, which had kind of an adjacent product to this, but I'll let either of you take it if you'd like.
Nic, go for it.
I think they've been there for a long time, right? Nessus, widely used in DoD, kind of more legacy scanner. I don't think they do a great job with modern tech. Splunk, it's a great SIEM capability. It's expensive. Elastic is, like you said, have their own capabilities now.
Yep.
There's a lot of them. At the end of the day, you have to see, cost and scale, and that's what matters. When you go cloud native, there's a lot of options now on both Azure and Amazon as well. But there's a point of having something agnostic that can run everywhere, particularly if you're multi-cloud. So it kind of makes sense to have a capability like this. So it's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Are these your competitors? Not anymore.
I would not think they are competitors of you guys.
No, not of Anchor. I worked at Elastic prior to Anchor, and we'll
I would
say
say Elastic and Splunk would be competitors, but
Yeah,
even
oh,
that,
yeah.
right? Elastic is broader and has other things, right? So it's
yeah.
a little bit of comparing apples and bananas, but whatever.
Well, it never stopped anyone. So oh, okay. Cool. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. We're nearly out of time. So I have one last question for the two of you. And as we look at the madness that has just been the last probably week or two of everything, right? And I think, what is the thing in security you see that you're kind of most hopeful or excited for kind of the next thing coming, right? Because like there's a lot going on, and I feel like anytime we have security discussions, I feel like it's only negative, because we talk about vulnerabilities, we talk about risk, we talk about how we're, failure in old versions and all of this, and there's cool stuff going on. So I'll let either of you
go first, though.
Sure, go for it.
Sure. I'll make it quick. This feels like the cop-out answer, but AI. I think AI is always your answer.
Oh, that's cool. That's good.
No, but there's incredible stuff going on right now with regards to automated vulnerability scanning, right? And the ability to, LLMs, they're great with language, and software is language, and some of my old colleagues and friends from the Red Team days are doing some super cool stuff. I think it's just a matter of time before we see some absolutely mind-boggling vulnerability scanners, automated scanners coming out that will actually have the ability to fix bugs in real time too, right? There's like it's like R2D2, like out on the skin of the ship, like identifying breaks and fixing them on its own. There's that's a double-edged sword, right? Because you're gonna have bad actors using them as well.
Yep.
But that's why the good guys need them. So that's what gets me so most excited for the space.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, what you got for us, Nic?
Well, sure, AI is exciting, but I think it's as scary as it is exciting, right? Because you see malicious actors now use AI to generate malware and automate discovery, and I think it's gonna be a nightmare. So I'm not sure that's a hopeful message you were hoping for. The SOCs are going to be vastly, automated with AI. Not sure it's great news for people. They might not have a job. So again, there's pros and cons everywhere. I'm not very excited about any of it. I think it's overall pretty scary, and it's going to get harder and it's going to get more painful. I think the velocity of vulnerabilities is going to get insane. AI is going to help a little bit, but the defending team is always going to be behind the attacking team. So it's still going to be playing catch up. So I don't have a great story for you here to make you warm and fuzzy.
That's not warm and fuzzy at all.
No.
Now, I will say though, defenders,
that's the real world we live in. There's not warm and fuzzy when you see what we do in DoD. There's not much of that, unfortunately.
Well, that's fair. Things we don't. But now I will. What's that?
It's been 7 years since I got out of uniform, and Nic was in the service much more recently. As an executive. So maybe it's just I'm too far away for too long. I've become optimistic and naive.
I mean, it's fine to be optimistic, right? But it's also great to keep up with the AI offensive side. I think that's as scary as the defensive benefits. So, everything we can do with AI, they can use against us. So it's.
I'm going to take these two answers and tie them together into my slightly happier thought than Nic's comment. Is I think you're both right. There's exciting things that can happen here. There's scary things that can happen here. But I think I'm the most hopeful that the way all of the LLMs and all of this tech is going to carry us forward, it means we have to get better as defenders, because by definition, the bad guys will make progress and then we will defend against it. And I am completely confident that we will find a way to do this, just because the one thing humans are really good at is screwing things up, but then we're also pretty good at fixing the things we screw up. So I am very hopeful that we will sort all this out and that we're going to find many, many ways to leverage this technology to do amazing and clever things that we haven't even thought of yet. So I'm hopeful. I am. All right, gang, this was fun. I want to thank you both for this amazing conversation. It was great. I mean, Dreamfactory is doing cool stuff. Ask Sage is doing cool stuff. Oh, I've got the slide. I'm sorry. I have to advance the slide one more. There we go. This is where you can kind of learn all about what's going on. We've got a handout, obviously, as part of this. We'll send you the slides. There's all the usual webinar. You'll get the link to the recording and all that stuff at the end. But yeah, I mean, these are two cool companies, two great people. You know, if you have any questions or comments, let them know. But all in all, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Nic. Thank you, Terence. And
Thank you.
until next time, thank you much, everybody.
Thank you.